Hail and well met, friends of Ultima and Wurm. This is the 8th part in my Ultima Nostalgia series, which documents the process of recreating the world of Ultima Online in Wurm Unlimited. In the last episode we were building the Hidden Valley, but in this episode we turn our gaze slightly to the east, to one of the most beautiful cities in all of Britannia, the seaside city of Trinsic. This city has always been a favorite of mine due to its sandstone architecture, its deep blue water canals, and the many bridges that crisscross over them. It is no wonder that it has been a hotspot for many role players over the years. For those interested in Wurm modding, we will also look at the process I've used to edit or replace some of the Wurm textures with my own version, as well as how to create a focus zone so that upon entering or departing a zone, you'll get a notification text. But for now, let's get started building the city itself. As usual, we start off by coloring some tiles, taking a screenshot from up high and mapping it to my gridded file in Photoshop. As we can see, the landmass we're going to be transforming is huge, and building this city is going to be one of the larger efforts in this project, so I probably won't even furnish any of the buildings for now, as there will be more than enough to do with building the city alone. Now that the entire city has been mapped out, I'm ready to start paving the roads and marking the blueprints for the buildings. Next, we will start fixing the heights of the various areas. I always remembered Trinsic to be a relatively flat city, but as I was mapping it out, I was surprised to realize just how many height variations there actually are. Now we've almost finished paving and setting the heights of the entire city. I've also built most of the bridges by now. Time to start building. Let's start off with the outer walls that guard the city. At the time of building this, we do not yet have sandstone parapets in Wurm, so I made my own using the stone parapet mesh put together with the sandstone texture. As we can see, the city is coming along very nicely indeed, and by now most of the buildings have been built. Time to attend to some gardening. As with the jungles outside of the city, I decided to use enchanted grass and oak trees inside as well. The deep green of the enchanted grass looks great contrasted with the warm sandstone materials. We now come to one of my favorite things to do, setting up the lighting. If you've been watching the previous episodes, you'll have noticed by now how much I like nighttime in Wurm, especially if there's nice lighting. So, what do you guys think? Can you recognize Trinsic yet? Time to add some final touches to the city, like this animal pen that has some water troughs. Unfortunately, Wurm does not have any water troughs at this point, although I'm sure it's been requested. So, to mimic the look, I'll have to improvise by reskinning something to look similar. To help find a suitable item, I'll browse through this item list I've made. I'll include the link in the description below. The closest thing I can find is the coffer, and since I probably won't be using it as is, it's okay to sacrifice for this purpose. Let's use this opportunity to show you how I've been replacing textures in Wurm Unlimited up till now, in case you want to try doing something similar for your own server. I've basically learned as I go along, so while I'm experienced with Photoshop, modding Wurm, however, is something I'm completely new to, and something I only started doing when I began this project a few months ago. So, if you notice me saving the files in the wrong format or doing anything incorrectly, please let me know. Also a disclaimer that if you attempt to do what I'm about to show you, make sure you've made a backup of your server, and please understand that you will be doing this at your own risk. Although I've done this a million times by now and had no problems, there was this one time I must have messed something up, and I actually had to reinstall everything to get Wurm to work again. So, what you need to look for is the graphics jar file, which can be found in the folders of the client. Something to make clear is that when dealing with Wurm Unlimited, the client and the server files are different and located in different folders. They also have their own sets of mods. The client is the main meat and gravy of the game, and any changes you make to it, for instance changing the textures, affect any server you log on to, regardless of whether it's your own server or someone else's. The server files, however, control only the stuff directly related to that particular server. For instance, the files that affect the shape of the land, or settings that control how skills are balanced. In this case, we're talking about the Ultima Nostalgia server, but I have other private servers as well that I do experiments on. Since it's the client we will be modifying, make sure that you do not have your Wurm client running. Once you've found the graphics jar file, change the extension to zip. Windows will give you a warning, but just press yes. Once we're done, we will be changing it back to a jar file. To access the files within, you should have some packing software that can open and pack zip files. I use WinRAR myself. Now that it's open, we can see that Wurm has a huge amount of folders and files, most of which are 3D files and their textures, but it also contains the game UI as well as the sound files. I'll line up the zip window next to XNView, which is a free program I use for browsing images on my computer. I've been using it for years and couldn't recommend it enough for anyone who deals with image files. You can see that there are quite a few files that I've already modified. I do try to keep it to a minimum though, because when I someday open this server to the public, it's clear that most people will not replace their textures just so that they can see the server the way you see it in these videos. Instead, 99% of visitors will most likely be just using the default graphics jar or the one that they've modified themselves. So although I'd actually love to go nuts changing a lot of stuff, there is the danger of the end result looking really bad for those with just the default files. I wish there was some easy way for visitors to be able to see a server in its customized state. Earlier we decided that we'll reskin the coffer. Now I just need to find the coffer texture and unzip it to my hard drive. Next I'll get to work modifying it in Photoshop. About half an hour later, this is the end result. Before and after. I have yet to test it in the game, so I might have to tweak it later, but for now let's see the process of taking this back into the Wurm client. Until recent times, most textures in Wurm were JPEGs or PNGs, and while you can still find some files which are, most have been converted into DDS files. This is a format I've never worked with before making this server, so it took some investigating to figure out how to save a DDS file and what options to choose. What I have here is the NVIDIA Texture Tools for Adobe Photoshop plugin. If you don't have Photoshop, I'm assuming there are other tools for saving DDS files. I'll include a link to the plugin in the description below. So what texture compression to pick from the drop-down? Since this texture is fully opaque and does not have any transparency, we will use the DXT1 option. For textures that have transparency, however, you'll need to use the DXT5 option. So far I've been using these two options for all the DDS textures I've been modifying, and it's worked out fine, but if anyone notices me using some wrong settings, please let me know. Time to take the texture back home into the graphics package, so I'll just drag it back into its own folder. Upon doing so, WinRAR rezips the file. Now we're ready to change the extension back from zip to jar and log back into the game to see how it looks. And there we go! Instead of two coffers, we can see two fake water troughs. The end result only really works from afar, of course, since the shape of the mesh has not been modified at all, but it's better than nothing. One of these days I should look into modifying meshes as well. By the way, I also adjusted the textures of the sandstone building and pavement materials. The natural color is a bit darker and less saturated than UO's sandstone, so I've gone and adjusted it a bit to better match the warm and more rich UO sandstone material. And while we're learning new things, I'd like to share something I learned how to do while making Trinsic. You know how when you enter or depart a certain area in Wurm, and you get this green text telling you what area you entered or departed from? Well, in Wurm Unlimited, you can edit and create those texts yourself. They're called focus zones, and they're edited in the database. For that, I use DB Browser. What you want to do is open the Wurm Zones DB file, which you can find in the server folder under the SQLite subfolder. Make sure both your Wurm client and server are turned off before changing the database. I'm not sure what would happen if you edited on the fly while the game and server were running, but better safe than sorry. If, however, it is actually possible to edit and save while running the game, please let me know, as that would certainly make things more convenient, but I highly doubt you can. Go to the Browse Data tab, and from the drop-down choose Focus Zones. It will list any existing focus zones your server currently has, together with their starting and ending coordinates. To get the coordinates you want, you can do so in-game by examining a tile with your ebony wand, which would display its coordinates. Or if you've generated your own map, you can use the map viewer to check the coordinates, which in this case is much more convenient since we're already logged off the game. Once you're done editing the values, write the changes to the database, start up your server, and log back into the game to see the results. Now let's fly around and test to see if this worked. Yay, it's working! When I made the changes, I also set coordinates for Britain, so let's see if those worked as well. It looks like the Britain focus zone is working as well. Great. I'll have to set one for each of the cities at some point. Now getting back to Trinsic, other than the furnishings inside of the buildings, the city is now ready, so let's mount our trusty old steed and take a tour of the city by horseback. have to say that I'm thrilled at how Trinsic turned out. How gorgeous is this city! So warm and cozy. Exactly the kind of vibe you'd want from a city located in the southern region of the map. Just imagine when it becomes fully furnished and populated. This couldn't be a more perfect time to build Trinsic, as sandstone was only just recently introduced to the game. As I've said many times before, Wurm just gets better and better with each passing year. I can't express enough just how much I appreciate the hard work done by both the Wurm team and the volunteers who help contribute to this game. Sometimes I think to myself, what on earth would I be doing if I didn't have Wurm? Every single time a new game comes out that I get excited about, I end up disappointed each time. For instance, Ultima Online. It came out just recently, and it is a gorgeous game, but the gameplay just didn't keep my interest. It's always the same with these new games. I log into them and just think, man, I could be playing Wurm right now. Anyhow, enough rambling. I hope you enjoyed this episode and perhaps even learned a thing or two. In the next episode, we're going to head out to the snowy landscape of Dagger Isle, far to the northeast. I'll see you there.